Welcome back to MicroDose Psychedelic Capital. This is the first of 3 panels where we dive into the business models that are involved in the psychedelic industry. The first one we're looking at is this panel here, which is the medicalization, a bit of a mouthful, of psychedelics. We will also be touching on legalization and decriminalization a little bit later on in today's event. We're missing a Malik Salazi, so Malik, wherever you are, please do come in. But it does give me great pleasure to welcome my 2 guests who are going to tell you, first of all, a little bit about themselves, which is Gregg Peterson and Jonathan Dickinson. Gregg, maybe if you could just do a very quick introduction, a little bit about yourself, your background, and also your company.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, MicroDose, for hosting this today. So I've been in healthcare R&D for over 20 years, helping develop pharmaceuticals, medical devices, combination products, and biologics. I'm with Bexson Biomedical. We are developing a couple different work streams. We're developing low-dose ketamine for the treatment of pain management. That's our lead therapy and our lead indication. We're also doing discovery work on novel NMDA receptor antagonists for a variety of both pain management and mental health indications.
Thank you, Gregg. And Jonathan, yourself.
So hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm calling in from Tijuana, Mexico. I've been down in Mexico working around Ibogaine therapy for the last 11 years. So I don't have a professional training as a medical professional. Most of my professional experiences come from being around Ibogaine treatment and then studying psychology later. I kind of came to it because of personal experiences in psychiatry that resulted in some, what they call iatrogenic harm. And so I have a little bit of even though I've been around Ibogaine treatment and work with medical teams, help to develop clinical guidelines for Ibogaine-assisted detox, I have a bit of a critical perspective around broad, wide-scale medicalization of psychedelics in general. So I'm glad to be part of this discussion.
Thank you, Jonathan. And actually, you raise a good point, actually. When we talk about the medicalization of psychedelics, there are many people who are coming to this with, a true medical background, fantastic degrees, but maybe not an awful lot of practical experience of working with psychedelics. Is there sort of can the two live side by side with people who've got real practical experience and with people who are coming at this from a pure sort of medical perspective?
I mean, I think that they do live side by side around Ibogaine to some extent. I mean, there's been people who have been more successful at blending than others. I think what we see is people focusing more on one side or the other. I think what gets missed in the medicalization of Ibogaine treatment, at least, because that's what I know most about, is this kind of expansiveness of time that opens up through the experience. And when you're just looking at medical symptoms and like treating for a medical indication, you can easily lose sight of the rest of what's going on. So when I'm working with people post-treatment, sometimes it's months and months and months, or even connecting with people years after their treatment, and people are still relating with this experience and it's still moving through them in their life. So I think that it can be useful for very specific things. Obviously, with Ibogaine, we use that to focus on mitigating cardiac risks and doing some pre-screening. But as far as I'm concerned, like it serves a very specific role there, and there is a lot more to take into account.
Thank you. Question for you, Gregg. When we were speaking just before we went live, we were sort of touching on the different pathways that psychedelics will find their way into the patient population. And we touched on some of the challenges which the medicalization model may present. What do you see those sort of challenges are most likely to be, and what sort of steps would you like to see to take some of them away and help resolve them.
Thank you, Jan. And I don't have all the answers, but I think the question we're asking, and the question I would encourage the industry to ask, is how do we maximize patient access to these therapies?
Yeah.
They have an enormous amount of potential, but how do we actually get them to patients? Legalization is one very legitimate pathway to get it to patients, and likely with not a really, really high cost. But if we look at ketamine infusion clinics right now, those are providing a lot of clinical benefit to a lot of patients where they're infusing high dose ketamine, but it is cash pay. It is not inexpensive in the United States, at least. And so we have a lot of patients, using that, but they're upper and middle class patients. You're not getting those therapeutic benefits to the masses. So there's a lot of things we can criticize the U.S. healthcare system about, but if you want to get it to all the populations, it probably needs to be either reimbursed by Medicare or insurance. And most of the time, you have to go down the FDA approval pathway to get to that. So I think that this is a unique industry in that we're both looking at both legalization as well as the FDA approval pathway. But how do we maximize patient access? In a lot of cases, it's going to be going down that FDA approval pathway.
Thank you. I mean, do you see a time, Jonathan, where Ibogaine will be, not going down the legalized route, but the medicalized route in terms of, patients being able to get access to that in say, the United States?
Well, I don't know how that will play out in the United States. I'm Canadian living in Mexico, so I've been paying attention to that, and I think
I always get that wrong.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I think there's at least some more movement in that direction in Canada. There's a company there that's applying to do clinical trials, and I think what you said, Greg, is totally accurate. I think what the market is going to focus on is what's billable in terms of the psychiatric profession. And I mean, my only criticism of it is what has been billable in the past and the way that we do those diagnoses has not resulted in really effective treatments. That we don't see that psychiatry as a profession has been able to lower the burden of what we call mental illnesses in general by focusing on those kind of billable hours. And it's kind of where I see the pitfalls with Ibogaine as well. If you do start to take into account what's actually happening in the treatment and make room for it and support it properly, I don't know that it is more cost effective than other detox options that are out there, for example.
It's interesting because you have the drug, whatever that may be, and then you have to deliver it. And in many cases, this is an experience where there's another healthcare professional there, whether it's a therapist or otherwise. And I think that what both the industry as well as clinicians need to do is work together to say, okay, this is a holistic therapy. It's not just the drug, and it's not just a therapist, with that patient, whether it's Ibogaine, whether it's ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, whatever. And, there's a lot to learn with how Spravato is being rolled out right now, because that is the case there, or at least the patient has to be under observation for a period of time. And so, are we doing a good job of accounting for that and making sure all of that is billable? Unfortunately, that's a reality. If you want to roll it out to the wider population, you do need to pay attention to those different costs.
Can you think of any other sort of category of medicine where these two areas have had to find a way of coexisting before, given your background, Greg, in many other areas of medicine?
So interestingly, I'm going to go to an odd one, which is actually the delivery of Botox. Botulinum toxin is used for both aesthetic uses as well as therapeutic uses. Fantastic drug, but it's useless if the clinician doesn't know his or her anatomy. You have to be able to place it into the right part of the body. And so you need an artist, with the syringe, and you need the drug. You need them both. And if you don't have those two, you do not have an effective therapy. And unfortunately, you can do a lot of harm if you do not have a good understanding of the anatomy for whoever's injecting that.
A very good comparable. I mean, so given sort of the finite number of suitably trained therapists that we have right now, Do you see this as being one of the kind of the Achilles heels of scaling the, can we get as many therapists as we need to allow for as many patients as we all like to get psychedelic therapy?
I'll take that first, and Jonathan, maybe you have some thoughts.
Yeah.
I think that it is very common when you roll out a new therapy. Let's take a blue chip pharmaceutical company. When they roll out a new therapy, they spend a lot of time and energy training clinicians how to use this therapy. And in many cases, the nurses that might be in their office or other healthcare professionals. So that model already exists when you talk about, again, traditional delivery of healthcare. Train them how to use that, whether it's in the operating room or in the clinic. So that kind of exists there. Your other point was, do we have a sufficient number of therapists that could even receive that training? And it's a good question. I think that there's a lot of people that could use psychedelic medicine very effectively in the clinic that just need to be trained up and have an open mind that this is a good pathway, this is a good potential therapy, and then use it. It's a good question. I actually don't know the macro numbers on that across a given market. Do we have sufficient personnel?
Yeah, I mean, I think the numbers that Rick Doblin, who is 67 today, so happy birthday, Rick Doblin, gave in terms of the amount of therapists that they're going to need to successfully implement MDMA therapy was in the high tens of thousands. And I think that leads to kind of one of my earlier sort of points I was talking through with Jonathan. Does this need to be a new breed of therapist who comes specifically into the psychedelic space to implement these therapies?
I mean, at least personally, I've never had this agenda of scaling up the access to it. We've definitely tried to reduce individuals' barriers to it. But in terms of scaling it up, I think my motivation to do that would be if I felt like it would solve a public health problem, which I don't think that Ibogaine will. I think if there was a focus on trying to find effective detoxes, then we would be looking at all kinds of other options that exist for detox in general. That's not what anybody's looking for. Insurance companies are not looking to support detoxes. They're looking for medication management. So there's all kinds of barriers to even being able to properly approach the question. But I mean, with my background and my experience, what I feel most comfortable referring people to are places where there's some medical support, but where the therapist and the people who are involved really love what they're doing. And usually that comes out of some kind of personal connection to it. So how do you teach that and how do you scale that? I don't know if I have the answer to it.
Richard, you asked about sort of gaps that currently exist. And Jonathan, maybe you brought up a good example, the one right there. Again, I'm going to put the responsibility back on our industry to make the economic case, right? I think that there's a lot of situations where you can say, and Bexson is doing this, just to use it as an example. If we can reduce the number of patients taking opioids because we have a non-opioid alternative for pain management, we believe we're going to reduce the number of patients getting addicted to opioids. And then we're going to reduce the downstream overdose deaths and all the other economic pain that comes with opioid use and opioid misuse. We should be, and Bexson is, and I encourage this industry, run the numbers on this, make the macro case to the US healthcare system, the Canadian healthcare system, the European, about the dollars that can be saved by either intervention earlier for a patient or treating that indication better. And so you've got, get that patient back in the workforce, get that patient out of the hospital, out of the addiction treatment facility, whatever it may be. I think the numbers will be very favorable to a lot of these therapies we're talking about.
And when you've run those numbers, what have they started to sort of look like for you, Greg? I mean, sort of very top line.
Yeah, top line. So there's human and there's economic, right? And so It depends who your audience is. If my audience is a Kaiser, I want to show them that you're going to have fewer costs in the hospital, in the clinic. You're going to have fewer costs outside of the clinic. Get the patient from spending money on healthcare. I hate to put it that way, but that's the goal, right? But then there's also the human numbers that you have fewer patients addicted, fewer patients to an overdose deaths. Those speak to a lot of groups, politicians and otherwise,